In 1997, the British government made it a criminal offence to sell a T-bone steak. Not drugs, not weapons. A steak. Butchers who had carved beef on the bone for generations faced prosecution overnight. And that is only number 14 on this list. Because across the last century, Britain has quietly outlawed some of the most delicious meals your grandparents ever put on the table. Turtle soup that warmed the Lord Mayor's banquet. Songbird pies that fed villages. Whale steaks that got us through rationing. Number 7 involves puddings so beloved that Parliament debated saving them. These 25 meals were not dangerous. They were delicious. But one by one, regulations, animal welfare laws, and food safety rules pulled them from British plates. Hit subscribe, because some of these are coming back and you will want to know which ones. Lark pie filled the tables of rural England for centuries before the law decided the sky belonged to the birds. Farm workers netted skylarks in autumn fields, plucking dozens and packing them breast down into deep pastry cases with hard-boiled eggs, parsley, and melted butter. The pie was baked until golden, then filled through a hole in the crust with a rich jellied stock that set firm overnight. A single pie might hold 30 or 40 birds, each no bigger than a man's thumb, creating a filling that was dark, gamey, and extraordinarily rich. In the 1920s, lark pie still appeared at harvest suppers across East Anglia, the pastry carried proudly to trestle tables in barnyards. Children fought over the tiny legs, crunching through delicate bones. The Protection of Birds Act 1954 swept skylarks under legal protection. Netting them became a criminal offence. The pies vanished almost overnight. Older farmers recalled the taste decades later, describing it as sweeter and richer than any farmed bird could match. Number 24. Swan roast crowned medieval banquets and grand feasts across England. Whole birds were stuffed with herbs and spices and roasted on spits until the skin turned burnished and crackling. The meat was dark, closer to goose, with a richness that came from a life on open water. Since the 12th century, all unmarked mute swans have belonged to the crown. Killing or eating one without royal permission meant imprisonment. The Wildlife and Countryside Act, 1981, sealed it permanently. The roast that once crowned the grandest tables in England is now as illegal as it is forgotten. Number 23. Turtle soup warmed Georgian and Victorian dining rooms with an exotic richness no other dish could rival. Green sea turtles shipped live from the Caribbean were kept in London fishmongers' tanks and simmered for days with Madeira wine, lemon, and cayenne until the broth turned dark and glossy. By the early 1900s, turtle soup graced every Lord Mayor's banquet and the menus of the Savoy. A single bowl cost more than a working man's daily wage. But the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species made the commercial trade illegal by 1984. Mock turtle soup made from calf's head could never replicate the deep marine richness. Today, the very idea shocks most diners. Yet for generations, this was the undisputed taste of British sophistication. Whale meat steaks fed a hungry nation during post-war rationing. Between 1947 and 1951, the Ministry of Food promoted whale as cheap protein, distributing it through butchers and school canteens. The meat was dark, almost purple, with a strong flavor that divided opinion sharply. Children pushed it around their plates. Mothers disguised it with onion gravy. A pound cost 1 shilling and 4 pence, cheaper than any fresh meat on the ration. Britain's last whaling operations ended in 1963. The International Whaling Commission moratorium from 1986 made the trade illegal. Whale meat is now a criminal import. For a generation of post-war children, its dark iron taste is the flavor of austerity itself. Number 21st. Badger ham was the countryman's secret across the West Country and Wales. Gamekeepers trapped badgers in autumn, when the animals were fattest, cured the hind legs in salt and brown sugar, and hung them in smokehouses alongside pork and venison. The meat was dense and dark, with a sweet, nutty flavor from the badger's diet of roots and berries. In Somerset and Devon, badger ham appeared at harvest suppers into the 1960s. Recipes passed quietly between farming families, never written down. The Protection of Badgers Act, 1992, carries unlimited fines and 6 months in prison for interfering with a badger. The ham that graced farmhouse tables became one of Britain's most thoroughly illegal foods. Yet in Exmoor pubs, older drinkers still speak of the taste with reverence. Number 20. Rook pie was the springtime ritual of English villages. Each May, farmers organized a shoot when young rooks were fat but could not yet fly. Housewives packed the dark meat into deep dishes with hard-boiled eggs, onions, and thick gravy under short-crust pastry. The taste was strong and earthy, gamier than pigeon. A single pie could feed a family for 2 days. Through the 1950s and the 1960s, rook pie appeared at village fetes across Oxfordshire and Suffolk. The Wildlife and Countryside Act, 1981, restricted the killing of rooks, and changes to general licenses in 2019 tightened controls further. The casual village shoot became a legal minefield. The pies that celebrated springtime vanished. First pattern break. Here is something the history books rarely mention. Britain's relationship with illegal food is about class. Turtle soup was legal for the rich until the turtles ran out. Lark pie was legal for the poor until someone decided the birds mattered more than the harvest supper. Badger ham was legal for the farmer until the suburbs decided badgers were pets. Almost every entry on this list was eaten openly, proudly, for generations. Nobody hid it. The law changed, and overnight, tradition became crime. Keep that in mind as we continue. Number 19. Hedgehog baked in clay was the signature dish of Romani travelers across Britain. The method was as old as the camps themselves. A hedgehog was encased in a thick coating of river clay and buried in the embers of an open fire. After an hour, the clay cracked open, and the spines came away cleanly with the shell, leaving tender, pale meat that tasted somewhere between chicken and rabbit. Traveler families taught the technique generation by generation. It was survival food, free food, taken from hedgerows when nothing else was available. The Wildlife and Countryside Act, 1981, made killing hedgehogs illegal, and subsequent conservation placed the species under increasing protection. Catching or killing one deliberately is now criminal. The clay-baked tradition has been extinguished. Romani oral histories preserve the memory with fierce pride. It was never cruelty. It was dinner. Number 18. Calf's head soup turned the cheapest part of the animal into working-class elegance. Butchers sold whole heads for a few pence. Housewives simmered them for hours with root vegetables, peppercorns, and a bundle of herbs. The broth became rich and gelatinous. Cheek meat fell in tender shreds, and the tongue was sliced alongside. In some households, even the brains were fried in butter. By the 1960s, calf's head still appeared in butchers' windows across the north, glassy eyes staring at passing shoppers. But during the bovine spongiform encephalopathy era, specified risk material regulations banned the sale of cattle skulls, brains, and spinal cord for human consumption. The entire head became classified as waste. The soup vanished because the law removed the main ingredient from the food chain. Number 17. Broxy mutton fed Scottish and Northern Hill farmers when sheep died of natural causes on the fell. Farmers butchered the carcass quickly, hanging it in cold air, then roasting or stewing the joints. Nobody questioned it, because everybody did it. The Food Safety Act 1990 made it illegal to supply meat from animals not slaughtered in licensed abattoirs. Even using broxy from your own flock now operates in a legal grey area no farmer would risk. The tradition of wasting nothing was quietly criminalized. Number 16. Potted hare with juniper was the gamekeeper's reward. Hares hung for a week until the meat darkened, then slow cooked with port wine and berries before being shredded, packed into stone pots, and sealed under clarified butter. The paste spread like silk on fresh bread, wild and earthy and utterly unlike anything from a shop. The Hunting Act 2004 and tightening food hygiene regulations that made unlicensed game processing effectively illegal squeezed potted hare from existence. Today, hare itself is hard to find. The potted version, once the proudest jar on the gamekeeper's shelf, is a ghost. Number 15. Squirrel pie-filled cottage kitchens when grey squirrels were protein, not pests. Housewives browned the pieces in dripping, layered them into a deep dish with mushrooms, onions, and ale, then covered the lot in pastry. The meat was delicate, slightly sweet, closer to rabbit. Through the 1950s, squirrel pie was ordinary fare in Herefordshire and the Welsh Marches. Modern food hygiene regulations make selling wild-caught squirrel commercially nearly impossible without licensed facilities. The pie that solved pest control and dinner simultaneously has been regulated into obscurity. Second pattern break. Half these entries were not banned because they were dangerous. They were banned because Britain changed its mind about what food should look like. We decided that if it did not come wrapped in plastic on a refrigerated shelf with a barcode and a best before date, it was not really food. The regulations that killed these dishes were written for factories processing 10,000 units an hour. They make no sense for a farmer's wife making blood pudding from her own pig. But the law does not distinguish. The farmhouse kitchen that fed Britain for 1,000 years was quietly made illegal by rules designed for someone else entirely. Number 14. Beef on the bone was banned outright in December 1997, the most dramatic food prohibition in modern British history. In response to the BSE crisis, the government made it a criminal offence to sell beef on the bone, including T-bone steaks, oxtail, and rib roasts. Butchers who had carved these cuts for decades faced prosecution. No T-bones at the steakhouse, no oxtail stew from the butcher, no proper standing rib roast for Christmas dinner. The ban was controversial from the first day. Scientists argued the risk was negligible. Butchers protested outside Parliament. Restaurants that had built reputations on dry-aged rib of beef were forced to reinvent menus overnight. Yet the government held firm, arguing public confidence mattered more than statistical probability. When the ban was finally lifted in December 1999, something had changed. Oxtail had become expensive, repositioned as a restaurant delicacy rather than the cheap family stew it had always been. T-bones never fully returned to the everyday British table. The ban lasted 2 years, but its effect on how Britain eats was permanent. A generation learned that the government could take your dinner away overnight, and the cuts that came back never quite tasted the same to those who remembered them. Number 13. Faggots made with lights were the pride of black country butchers. Lungs gave traditional faggots their distinctive, airy, almost fluffy texture. They were mixed with liver, heart, belly pork, breadcrumbs, and sage, wrapped in caul fat and baked until the edges crisped. EU regulations, adopted into UK law, prohibited lungs in commercially sold food products because of contamination risk. Traditional butchers were forced to reformulate. Modern faggots are denser and heavier, lacking the texture that made the originals beloved. The law did not ban faggots. It banned the ingredient that made them worth eating. Number 12. Unpasteurized milk delivered to the doorstep was how Britain started every morning. The milkman's float humming down the street, glass bottles clinking, cream rising in a thick yellow line. That milk was raw, untreated, alive. The flavor was richer than anything in a supermarket carton. The milk and dairies regulations ended the widespread sale. In Scotland, raw milk sales are banned entirely. In England, it can only be sold directly from farms, never through shops or delivered to doorsteps. The pint that built British mornings is now a controlled substance. Number 11. Traditional raw milk cheeses aged under 60 days faced extinction from food safety regulations. For centuries, British farmhouse cheesemakers produced soft, pungent cheeses using unpasteurized milk and techniques passed down through families, a living tradition. EU hygiene regulations effectively banned soft, raw milk cheese aged less than 60 days. Producers had to pasteurize, which fundamentally altered the product, or age it longer, which changed the texture entirely. Some producers closed. Britain lost an entire category of cheese, not to bad taste, but to good intentions. Number 10. Home-killed pig suppers were the annual ritual of farming communities across Britain. Each autumn, when the pig was fat and the weather was cold enough to hang meat safely, the family pig was slaughtered at home. The killing was quick. The butchering took all day. Every part was used. Hams were salted and hung in the outhouse. Sausages were stuffed into cleaned intestines. Black pudding was made from the fresh blood, caught warm in a bucket mixed with oatmeal and back fat. Chitterlings were cleaned and fried. The head was boiled for brawn. Neighbors came to help and left with parcels of meat wrapped in muslin, payment for their labor, and proof that community ran deeper than money. The pig killing was ritual, community, and survival rolled into one event that defined the farming calendar. Children watched from doorways, mothers boiled water and sharpened knives. The smell of scalded bristle hung in the air all morning. Then came the Slaughterhouses Act 1974 and later regulations. The new law made it illegal to slaughter livestock outside a licensed abattoir. The home kill, which had fed rural families for centuries, became a criminal act overnight. Farmers who had always killed their own pigs were forced to transport them to distant abattoirs, pay processing fees, and collect the meat days later. The communal butchering, the blood pudding from the morning kill, the fresh liver fried for breakfast while the carcass hung in the barn, all vanished. The regulations exist for good reason, but they ended a tradition that had sustained rural Britain since before anyone thought to write it down. Number 9. Jugged hare simmered in farmhouse kitchens for centuries. A whole hare was jointed, marinated overnight in port and juniper, then slow-cooked in a tall lidded jug set in simmering water. The blood was reserved and stirred into the sauce at the end, thickening it into a dark, glossy, intensely flavored gravy. Modern food safety regulations make the traditional method nearly impossible, legally. Without the blood, jugged hare is just a stew. With it, it was the finest game dish in the British canon. Third pattern break. Most of these regulations were not written with your grandmother's kitchen in mind. They were written for factories and production lines. The rules that make sense for a facility shipping chicken to 300 supermarkets make no sense at all for a farmer's wife making black pudding from her own pig. But the law does not distinguish. And so the farmhouse kitchen was quietly made illegal by rules designed for someone else. Number 8. Elva cakes were the springtime delicacy of the River Severn. where the arrival of baby eels marked the turning of the season as reliably as the first daffodils. Fishermen waded into the river at night with hand nets, scooping the tiny transparent eels from the flooding tide. Housewives pressed the elvers into flat cakes with egg and flour, frying them in bacon fat until crisp and golden. The taste was delicate, briny, with a texture somewhere between whitebait and scrambled egg. In Gloucester and the Forest of Dean, elver cakes appeared on pub menus and kitchen tables every spring. A bucket of elvers cost a few shillings in the 1960s, but European eel populations collapsed through the late 20th century. The species was classified as critically endangered. EU regulations introduced in 2009 imposed strict quotas and licensing. Prices soared. By 2012, elvers were worth more per kilogram than gold, driven by demand from Asian aquaculture farms. The fishermen who once supplied local kitchens for pennies found their catch worth thousands on the export market. The cakes vanished, not because anyone banned them directly, but because the economics and the ecology made them impossible. The springtime ritual of the Seven, as old as the river itself, has been priced and regulated into extinction. Number 7. School dinner. Puddings built on suet, white sugar, and golden syrup were the highlight of every school week for generations of British children. Spotted dick, jam roly-poly, treacle sponge, syrup tart. These puddings were steamed or baked in industrial quantities, served in thick slices with custard ladled from battered metal jugs, and they kept children warm and full through afternoons of long division and geography. The smell drifted from the kitchen at 11, building anticipation through morning lessons. By the mid-2000s, the campaign to improve school nutrition reached a tipping point. The school food standards, introduced following Jamie Oliver's campaign and formalized in 2006 and updated in 2014, imposed strict limits on sugar, fat, and portion sizes. Traditional suet puddings, with their heroic calorie counts and unapologetic sweetness, could not survive the new regime. Dinner ladies who had made treacle sponge for 30 years were told to stop. The puddings that had been a weekly institution since the 1940s were regulated off the menu. Schools replaced them with fruit pots and yogurt. Children survived, but something was lost. That steaming slab of spotted dick drowning in custard on a grey Wednesday afternoon is now exactly that. A memory that tastes sweeter with every passing year. Number 6. Turkey Twizzlers became the symbol of everything wrong with school dinners when Jamie Oliver held one up to a television camera in 2005 and asked the nation whether this was really what we wanted to feed our children. The answer, delivered in newspaper headlines and parliamentary debates, was a resounding. The processed meat spirals, beloved by children for their salty crunch and loathed by nutritionists for their ingredients list, were pulled from school menus nationwide. Some mothers passed fish and chips through school railings in protest. Petitions circulated. The outcry from parents was fierce, but the school food standards that followed did not merely ban Twizzlers, they banned an entire category of heavily processed foods from school kitchens. The Twizzler was relaunched in 2020 with a healthier recipe, but never returned to school menus. Love them or loathe them, Turkey Twizzlers changed how Britain thought about children's food. And for a generation of kids who grew up eating them, they remain the taste of a lunchtime that will never come back. Number 5. Ortolan bunting, roasted whole and eaten in a single shameful mouthful, was the most decadent illegal meal ever served in Britain. The tiny songbird, no bigger than a man's thumb, was captured alive, fattened in darkness on millet until it doubled in size, then drowned in Armagnac brandy and roasted for 8 minutes. Diners covered their heads with a napkin, supposedly to hide the act from God, and ate the entire bird, bones and all, in one prolonged, crunching bite. The tradition was French, but it crossed the channel into the dining rooms of London's wealthiest clubs through the 19th and early 20th centuries. By the 1970s, conservation efforts made the capture and sale of ortolan illegal across Europe. The bird is protected under the EU Birds Directive, and killing or selling one in Britain carries severe penalties under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. Yet rumours persist that ortolan dinners continued in private London rooms well into the 1990s. The napkin ritual, the brandy-soaked bird, the crunch of tiny bones. It is the most theatrical illegal meal in history, and the one most likely to make you question where the line falls between cuisine and cruelty. Number 4. Lead-glazed earthenware cooking pots were standard kitchen vessels for centuries. The lead leached into acidic foods like stewed fruit, pickled vegetables, and tomato sauces, creating a faintly sweet taste that cooks attributed to their ingredients rather than their pots. By the 18th century, doctors connected lead glazes with chronic poisoning, but the pots remained in common use well into the 20th century. Regulations progressively banned lead glazes on food vessels. Today, lead in pottery is criminal under consumer safety law. The sweetness was poison, but nobody knew, and the meals were, by every account, delicious. Fresh blood pudding made at the moment of slaughter was the farmhouse breakfast that sustained rural Britain through centuries of hard labor. When the family pig was killed in the autumn, the blood was caught in a bucket, still warm, and mixed immediately with oatmeal, diced back fat, onions, and seasoning. The mixture was poured into cleaned intestines and boiled within hours of the killing. The result was a black pudding of extraordinary freshness, nothing like the vacuum-packed discs on supermarket shelves. The blood was sweet and rich. The oatmeal gave it body. The fat melted into every bite. This was the pudding that fed farm workers through winter mornings, sliced thick and fried in dripping until the edges crisped, and the kitchen filled with a smell that was equal parts iron and comfort. But the combination of slaughterhouse regulations, which ended home killing, and food hygiene rules, which restricted the handling and processing of animal blood, made the traditional method impossible. Commercial black pudding is made in licensed facilities with processed, treated blood that has been stored and transported under controlled conditions. It is a different product entirely. The pudding your great-grandmother made on killing day from blood that was still warm in a kitchen that smelled of wood smoke and November is as illegal as it is irreplaceable. Number 2. Foie gras production was banned in Britain under animal welfare legislation, making it illegal to force feed ducks or geese on British soil. The production ban has been in effect since 2000, under the predecessor regulations to the Animal Welfare Act. No British farm can produce foie gras using the traditional gavage method. Yet importing and selling foie gras remained perfectly legal, creating a peculiar situation where Britain declared the production cruel and continued to eat the product happily. Campaigns to ban imports have intensified in recent years, with several councils banning it from civic events and restaurants facing protests for serving it. The dish itself, seared foie gras on toast, terrine with sauterne jelly, was a fixture of fine dining menus across London and the home counties for decades. Its taste is extraordinary. Rich, buttery, melting, with a flavor that lingers long after the plate is cleared. Whether it should exist at all is a question that divides chefs, diners, and animal welfare campaigners with equal passion. But on British soil, making it is a crime, and eating it may soon follow. Number 1. The full English breakfast as your grandmother made it has been dismantled piece by piece, not by a single law, but by a century of accumulating regulations that have stripped away almost every element that made it what it was. The black pudding was made from fresh blood at the home kill. Illegal. The eggs came from hens kept in battery cages, which were banned in 2012. The bacon was cured with nitrite levels that current standards would not permit. The sausages contained lungs and offal that regulations removed from the food chain. The bread was fried in beef dripping, saved in a ceramic jar on the stove, a practice that food hygiene inspectors would flag in any commercial kitchen. The tomatoes were grown in soil treated with chemicals long since prohibited. Individually, each regulation made sense. Collectively, they have made it impossible to recreate the breakfast your grandmother served on a Sunday morning in 1955. Every single component has been altered, reformulated, or replaced by something that meets modern standards but tastes nothing like what came before. The meal still exists in name. You can order a full English at any cafe in Britain. But it is not the same meal. It has been made legal by being made different. And the version your grandmother cooked, with its fresh blood pudding, its dripping fried bread, its raw milk in the tea, its sausages plump with lights, could land a modern cafe owner in court. The most iconic British meal of all is, in its original form, thoroughly and completely against the law. Try telling your grandmother that. She would not believe a word of it. But every regulation on this list exists, and every prohibition is real. Every dish was once served proudly on a British table. Share this with someone who remembers when food was simpler. If you tried any of these before they vanished, tell us in the comments.